I walked into my son's engagement dinner wearing the same flannel shirt I'd worn to fix the barn roof that morning. I hadn't changed. Maybe I should have. But I've spent 63 years being exactly who I am, and I wasn't about to start pretending otherwise for a room full of people I'd never met. My son Clifton had called me 2 weeks before to tell me about the dinner. "Dad, just come, okay? It's important to me." That was all he said. No dress code, no warning, just come. So I drove 3 hours from Harlan County, Kentucky, in my old Ford F-250, the one with the cracked passenger mirror and the rust eating up the rear wheel well. I pulled into the valet parking area of a restaurant called Rosalie's, the kind of place where they hand you a menu with no prices on it. And I watched the young man in the vest look at my truck like it had driven itself there by accident. I tipped him $20. He looked surprised. People always are. Inside, the maitre led me to a private dining room in the back. There were maybe 14 peoples already seated around a long table draped in white linen, crystal glasses, candles, the kind of floral centerpiece that costs more than my electric bill. I spotted Clifton across the room. He stood up when he saw me, and for a moment his face did something I can only describe as relief, like he'd been holding his breath. Beside him was a young woman I recognized from photographs, his fiancée, Aubrey. Pretty girl. Sharp eyes. The kind of pretty that knows exactly how pretty it is. Standing next to Aubrey was a man I didn't know yet, but would come to know very well. Her father, Warren. Big man. Silver hair swept back like he'd just stepped off a yacht. He was mid-sentence when I walked in, and he paused just long enough to look me up and down before continuing. I found my seat. I introduced myself to the people around me. Smiled. Asked the woman to my left if she'd driven far. Small talk, normal things. It was maybe 10 minutes in, while I was reaching for the bread basket, that I heard it. Aubrey leaned toward her mother, a thin, perfumed woman named Colette, and whispered something behind her hand. She thought she was being quiet. She wasn't. I don't know why he couldn't at least wear something decent. He smells like a farm. She said it like that was the worst thing a person could smell like the dirt that grows food, the honest sweat of work, the clean, cold air of a hillside at 5 in the morning, like all of that was something to be ashamed of. I set down the bread. I took a sip of water. Clifton had heard it too. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened. He looked at me across the table, and I gave him the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. Warren cleared his throat and steered the conversation toward a merger his company was handling. He talked about valuations and acquisition targets and Q3 projections. The table listened like he was reading scripture. I listened too. I've sat in enough boardrooms to understand exactly what he was saying, and I've sat in enough fields to understand what he wasn't. Dinner came. Filet mignon for the table. I ate mine and complimented the cook genuinely, because it was a good piece of meat, and I know what a good piece of meat tastes like. The woman next to me, I'd learned her name was Priscilla, Warren's sister, made a small comment about how refreshing it was that I enjoyed simple pleasures. I smiled. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Simple pleasures like a roof over your head, food on the table, clean water from a well you dug yourself. Those things never get old." She laughed like I'd said something charming and slightly dim. Warren waited until the dessert plates were being cleared. Then he folded his hands on the table and turned to me with the careful smile of a man who has decided to be generous. "So," he said, "Clifton tells me you run a farm out in Kentucky." "That's right," I said. "Beef cattle mostly. Some grain. Few hundred acres." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're calculating whether to feel sorry for you or dismiss you entirely. "Family operation?" "Started that way," I said. "My father worked it before me, his father before him." "Hard life," Warren said, not unkindly, just with the finality of a man closing a door. "Some days," I said. "Some days it's the best life there is." He smiled again, moved on, started talking about the wedding venue Aubrey had chosen, a resort property on the coast of South Carolina. The price he mentioned, casually, the way you mentioned the weather, was enough to make the couple beside me visibly impressed. I didn't react, I just listened. After dinner, when the table had softened into coffee and quiet conversations, Warren stood and clinked his glass. He thanked everyone for coming. He said some things about family and the future, and how proud he was of Aubrey. Then he looked at me across the table with that same careful smile. And of course, we want to make sure Clifton's family feels fully included in all of this. A pause. Even if our worlds are a little different. A few people laughed softly. Clifton's hand under the table had curled into a fist. I could see it from where I sat. I said nothing. I just picked up my coffee cup and took a slow sip. On the drive back to the hotel, Clifton had insisted I stay the night rather than drive home at midnight. My son walked me to my truck in the parking garage. The valet had brought it around, and it sat there under the fluorescent lights looking exactly like what it was, a working man's vehicle, dented and dirty, and completely unapologetic about it. Clifton stood with his hands in his pockets. He couldn't quite look at me. "Dad," he started. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. She didn't mean Clifton." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Look at me," he did. "Don't you ever apologize for someone else's character. You hear me? That's not yours to carry," he exhaled. "I don't know what to do, Dad. I love her. But tonight told you something," I said. "What you do with it is your business. I'm not here to make that choice for you. I'm just here because you asked me to be." He hugged me then, long and hard the way he used to when he was small and had a bad dream. I held on just as long. "Get some sleep," I said. "We'll talk more in the morning." I drove to the hotel. I sat on the edge of the bed in my flannel shirt, in a room that cost $340 a night because everything in this city did, and I thought about my father. He died when I was 31, hands like old leather, never complained about a single day of work in his life. Built the original barn himself, post by post, working weekends for 2 years while holding down a job at the feed mill. When he passed, he left me that farm and a note that said, "Take care of what matters. Let the rest go." I had taken care of what mattered. For 32 years I had taken very good care of it. What Warren didn't know, what most people at that table didn't know, was that the few hundred acres I'd mentioned had grown considerably since I inherited it. I hadn't lied, I just hadn't elaborated. The cattle operation had expanded in the late 90s. A timber deal in 2003 had returned more than I'd spent building the new processing facility. I'd partnered with a regional co-op in 2009 and held on to my equity stake when they went public in 2015. The land itself had appreciated in ways that still surprised my own accountant. I wasn't rich the way Warren was rich, the way that requires a certain type of restaurant and a certain type of car and a certain type of whiskey to signal itself to other people. I was rich the way good farmland is rich, deep, quiet, patient. But none of that was the point. Not really. The point was that a woman had looked at me and decided I was nothing, and she'd done it in front of my son, and the question of what to do about that had kept me sitting on the edge of that hotel bed until almost 1 in the morning. I finally lay down. I slept fine. I always sleep fine. The next morning, Clifton came to the hotel for breakfast. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. We sat in the hotel restaurant and ordered eggs. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and stared at the table. "She called me last night," he said. "Aubrey, she's upset. She says I embarrassed her by not defending the family when you came in dressed the way you were." I set down my fork. "What did you say?" "I said you're my father, and if she has a problem with how you dress, she has a problem with me." He looked up. She hung up. I picked up my fork again. "Good for you. Dad, I think we're in trouble." "You might be," I said, "but you handled it right." We ate in mostly comfortable silence after that. I paid the check. We walked out to the lobby together, and Clifton told me his plan. He was going to talk to Aubrey, try to smooth things over, give her a chance to understand how serious this was. I told him I supported whatever he decided. I meant it. What I didn't tell him was that I'd received a call that same morning, before he arrived, from Warren. Warren had gotten my number from Clifton's phone. I learned this later. He had called at 7:45 in the morning, in the tone of a man who was used to calling people at 7:45 in the morning and having them grateful for it. He told me he wanted to meet. Privately. Just the two of us. He had something he wanted to discuss. I agreed. We set a time for that afternoon. The restaurant he chose was a steakhouse downtown. More casual than the night before, but still expensive, Still the kind of place designed to make a certain kind of person feel at home and a certain other kind of person feel small. I arrived 5 minutes early. He arrived exactly on time, which I suspect was deliberate. We ordered. He made a show of recommending the ribeye. I ordered the ribeye. He seemed mildly disappointed that I hadn't ordered something lesser. After some surface-level conversation about Clifton's career and Aubrey's design firm, Warren leaned back in his chair and got to the point. "I want to be straightforward with you," he said. "Man to man." "I'd appreciate that," I said. "My daughter is accustomed to a certain kind of life. I've worked hard to provide that for her, and the man she marries is going to need to be capable of maintaining it. Not because I'm a snob." He smiled here, the smile of a man who is absolutely a snob. "But because I know my daughter. She has expectations, and those expectations aren't unreasonable." I nodded slowly. "Go ahead. I'm not sure Clifton has the earning potential to sustain what Aubrey needs long term. He's bright, don't get me wrong. But he's in a field," Warren waved a hand, "that doesn't scale the way other careers do. And with a father-in-law who is, let's say, not positioned to provide financial backing." He let that hang in the air. I took a bite of my ribeye. It was good. I chewed it thoughtfully. "What exactly are you asking me, Warren?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, I'm asking if you'd be willing to step back from Clifton's life a bit. Not disappear. Just allow us to guide him in certain directions. Aubrey's family has connections. I can open doors for him that, frankly, given your situation." Another careful pause. "You aren't in a position to open." I set down my knife and fork. I looked at Warren Alderman, because that was his full name, Warren Alderman, and he had said it 3 times the night before like it meant something, and I looked at him very calmly. "My situation," I said. "I don't mean any offense." "I know you don't," I said. "That's the interesting part." He shifted slightly. "I just think for everyone involved, Warren." I folded my hands on the table. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "What do you think my land is worth?" He blinked. Well, I don't know. A few hundred acres in eastern Kentucky, rural property, cattle operation. I'd guess, what, 2-3 million? On a good day?" I looked at him for a moment. "I have 4,200 acres, I said. "I've been buying adjacent parcels for 30 years. The cattle operation generates about 2.1 million annually. The timber rights on the back 40% of the property are leased to a paper company through 2031. That's another 300,000 a year. I hold an equity stake in a regional agricultural co-op that pays a quarterly dividend, and the land itself," I paused, "appraised last spring at just over $31 million. The restaurant was quiet around us. Warren had gone very still. "I also have a financial relationship with 3 regional banks," I continued, "in the form of significant deposits and 1 board seat. If Clifton needs doors opened, I've been quietly opening them since before Aubrey was born. I just don't make noise about it, because that's not how I was raised." Warren opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm not telling you this to win an argument," I said. "I'm telling you this because you made a decision about who I am, based on a flannel shirt and a truck with some rust on it. And that decision informed everything you said to me last night and everything you said to me 10 minutes ago. And I think you deserve to know that the foundation of that decision was wrong." I picked up my knife and fork again. "As for stepping back from my son's life, I cut another piece of steak. I won't be doing that." Warren said nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The performance was gone. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You owe your future son-in-law one," I said. "And your daughter owes my son one. That's a separate conversation." He nodded slowly. "You're right." We finished the meal in a different kind of silence. Not hostile, just recalibrated. That evening, Clifton called me on my drive home. He sounded lighter than he had at breakfast. "Aubrey wants to apologize," he said, "to me and to you. Whatever her dad said to her after lunch, I don't know exactly what happened, but something shifted." "Okay," I said. "She's not a bad person, Dad. She was raised a certain way. It doesn't excuse it." "No," I said, "it doesn't, but she's willing to learn. I think that's all any of us can do," I said. "Clifton." "Yeah? You stood up for yourself last night. That matters more than anything else that happened this week." He was quiet for a second. I learned from watching you. I drove the rest of the way home with the windows down and the radio off, past the county line, past the old grain elevator with its rusted roof, past the Methodist church where my father's funeral had been held 32 years ago on a cold Tuesday in March. When I turned onto my road, gravel, unpaved, lined on both sides by my own fencing, I stopped the truck for a moment and looked out at the fields in the late afternoon light. 4,000 acres of it, every inch paid for. Every fence post driven by hand, or by a hand I'd hired and paid fairly and treated with respect. Every head of cattle on that land had been weighed and watered and cared for like it mattered, because it did matter. All of it mattered. A farm isn't just land. It's a record of every decision you made when no one was watching. Every morning you got up before dawn because the work didn't wait for you to feel like doing it. Every year you chose to reinvest instead of spend, to improve instead of impress, to build something that would outlast the opinion of anyone who looked at your truck and thought they understood you. I've never needed anyone to understand me. That's the freedom you earn when you stop needing their approval. Aubrey called me herself 3 days later. She was nervous. I could hear it in the way she started talking too fast and then stopped herself. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I want to say that I'm sorry for what I said at dinner. It was disrespectful and it was wrong, and it doesn't matter what I was raised to think or not think. I should know better by now." "I appreciate that," I said. "Truly, I'd like a chance to do better if you're willing." I thought about my son's face when he hugged me in that parking garage, the relief in it, the hope. "Of course," I said. "That's all I ever wanted." The wedding is set for next June. South Carolina coast, just like Aubrey planned. I've already bought a new suit. Charcoal grey, good wool, the kind that lasts 20 years if you take care of it. I'll probably wear my good boots, the ones I wear to church. If anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with the man who paid for the rehearsal dinner. That's me, by the way. I offered. Warren accepted. Funny how things change once people know who they're actually talking to. But I'll let you in on something I didn't say to Warren, something I only said to Clifton. Standing in a parking garage under fluorescent lights, with rust on my truck and $31 million worth of Kentucky dirt on my boots. The most valuable thing I ever built wasn't on any balance sheet. It was a son who knew when the moment came whose side to stand on. That's worth more than all of it, every acre.